Hey there, ready to jump into some history?
Always.
Today's deep dive takes us to 18th century Peru
Oh, wow.
for a look at the Tupac Amaru II rebellion,
Okay.
one of the largest uprisings against Spanish colonial rule in the Americas.
Right. Okay.
And trust me, this story is anything but boring.
What's fascinating about this rebellion is that it wasn't a sudden explosion of anger. It was a slow burn,
Oh, okay.
fueled by years of simmering discontent.
I see.
Think about it this way.
Okay.
Imagine you're living in Peru in the 1700s under Spanish rule.
Okay.
You've got a complex social hierarchy with indigenous people often facing discrimination and limited opportunities.
Right.
It was a system ripe for rebellion.
Okay, so the stage is set for some serious tension.
Yeah.
We know the rebellion is coming,
Uh-huh.
but who was this Tupac Amaru II,
Right.
and what pushed him over the edge?
But Tupac Amaru II wasn't his original name. He was born Jose Gabriel Condorcanqui,
Okay.
a mestizo, which means he had both indigenous and European ancestry.
Okay.
And get this,
Yeah.
he was a descendant of Inca royalty.
Wow.
Well-educated, ran a successful business,
Mm-hmm.
and even tried to claim a Spanish noble title.
Wow, so he wasn't exactly some downtrodden peasant.
No.
What made someone like him turn against the Spanish crown?
Two major events really shaped his worldview.
Okay.
The Bourbon reforms
Uh,
and the expulsion of the Jesuits.
okay.
The Bourbon reforms were a series of laws passed by Spain
Yeah?
in the 1700s.
Right.
On the surface, they were meant to modernize the colonies,
Okay.
but they actually ended up placing stricter controls on the colonies and extracting more wealth,
Okay.
which caused a lot of resentment
Yeah.
among the locals.
And the Jesuits, weren't they the ones who educated Tupac Amaru II?
They were.
Okay.
And their expulsion from the Spanish colonies in 1767
Yeah.
sent shockwaves throughout Peru
Wow.
for Tupac Amaru II, who had been deeply influenced by their teachings.
Right.
It must have been a real turning point.
I see.
It demonstrated that the Spanish crown wasn't afraid to use its power in ways that directly impacted him and the people around him.
So how do you think this affected his view of the Spanish crown? I imagine it would make anyone question who they could trust.
Oh, yeah.
Here you have the people who educated you,
Right.
who you might have even seen as mentors,
Yeah,
suddenly being forced out by the very same authorities you're trying to work with.
exactly.
Yeah.
It would definitely make you question the system.
Okay.
But the seeds of rebellion were sown even earlier.
Oh, really?
Remember those Bourbon reforms I mentioned?
Uh-huh.
Well, one of their biggest impacts was shifting trade routes
Oh,
to favor Buenos Aires,
right.
which was becoming a major port.
Okay.
This new trade route meant economic hardship for many in Peru,
Yeah.
particularly those who relied on the older trade routes.
So even before the Jesuits were expelled, people were feeling the squeeze from these reforms.
Yep.
What about Tupac Amaru II's attempt to claim that Spanish noble title?
Yes,
Was that also part of the buildup to the rebellion?
it definitely played a role.
Okay.
So that title,
Yeah.
the Marquesado de Oropesa,
Right.
would have granted him some serious tax exemptions.
Wow.
But his claim was denied.
Oh.
And that denial was a pretty clear message about where he stood
Right.
in the eyes of the Spanish authorities. Even with his wealth and education, he was still seen as a second-class citizen.
So we've got economic hardship,
Huh?
religious upheaval, and social injustice all brewing in the background.
Yeah,
It sounds like a powder keg waiting to explode.
it really does.
What was the spark that finally ignited the rebellion?
In 1780,
Yeah.
Tupac Amaru II did something that sent shockwaves throughout Peru.
What's that?
He publicly executed Antonio de Arriaga,
Oh, wow.
a Spanish colonial official notorious for his cruelty.
Executing a Spanish official was a huge risk.
Absolutely.
Why do you think he chose this action? And what message was he trying to send?
Right.
Well, it certainly got people's attention.
It did.
I imagine he wanted to show that he was serious, that he was willing to challenge the Spanish authorities head on.
Yeah.
It was a very public and very dramatic declaration that the old rules no longer applied.
You're exactly right.
Yeah.
It was a bold move, and it resonated with many people who
Right.
were suffering under Spanish rule.
Yeah.
Initially, Tupac Amaru II insisted that he wasn't rebelling against the king or the church,
Great.
just against corrupt officials like Arriaga.
That's interesting. So he was
Yeah.
trying to frame it as a fight against injustice within the system.
Yes.
Not a rejection of the system itself.
Exactly. And that message resonated with a diverse group of people.
Oh, wow.
Indigenous people, mestizos, and even some Creoles. Those of Spanish descent born in the Americas joined his cause.
Oh.
They saw him as a leader who could bring about real change.
It's amazing how quickly the movement gained traction.
Yeah.
It seems like he was able to unite people from different backgrounds.
He was.
Yeah.
At least initially.
Yeah. But it's important to remember that his goals seem to have evolved.
Oh, really?
As the rebellion progressed.
In what way?
While his initial focus was on addressing specific grievances, like corruption and economic hardship,
right,
his vision seems to have expanded as the rebellion gained momentum.
So it wasn't just about reforming the system. It was about something bigger.
That's where it gets really interesting.
Oh, okay.
It appears Tupac Amaru II began to envision a fully independent Inca state.
Wow.
A return to the glory of his ancestors.
That's a big shift.
It is.
And this shift towards a more radical vision was likely influenced by someone very close to him.
Oh.
His wife.
Okay.
Michaela Bastidas.
Interesting. Michaela Bastidas was much more than just Tupac Amaru II's wife.
Oh, really?
She was a key figure in the rebellion.
Wow.
Many historians believe she played a crucial role in shaping its more radical direction.
But she wasn't just standing by her man.
No.
She was actively involved
Absolutely.
in the strategy and direction
Yeah.
of the rebellion.
Absolutely. She was involved in everything,
Right.
from logistics and communication to military strategy and even diplomacy. She was known for her sharp intellect and her ability to rally people to the cause.
That's amazing to hear.
It is.
Especially considering the time period when women were often relegated to the background.
Right.
It sounds like she was a true force of nature.
She was.
Yeah.
And her influence is evident in the way the rebellion evolved. Remember how we talked about Tupac Amaru II initially trying to frame the rebellion as a fight against corrupt officials, not the Spanish crown itself?
Right.
Well, as the rebellion progressed, that message started to shift. Oh, really?
Tupac Amaru II began to adopt more the symbolism of his Inca heritage.
Interesting.
He ditched the European clothing and started wearing traditional Inca garb. He also began using the Quechua language more prominently in his pronouncements.
It sounds like he was making a very deliberate effort to connect with his indigenous roots.
Exactly.
And to present himself as a true Inca leader.
Exactly. And that shift in symbolism, that embrace of his Inca heritage, was likely influenced by Michaela Bastidas.
It makes sense. If you're trying to create a truly independent Inca state, you need to tap into that shared history and identity.
Absolutely.
So how did the Spanish authorities react to this growing rebellion?
Well, they weren't just sitting back and watching. They were actively trying to crush the rebellion.
Oh, wow.
And one of the key battles that took place early on was the Battle of Sangara.
Okay, what happened there?
The Battle of Sangara was a significant victory for the rebels. They managed to defeat a Spanish force and capture a large amount of weapons and supplies.
Wow.
But it was a victory that came at a terrible cost.
What do you mean?
During the battle, a group of Spanish soldiers and civilians took refuge in a church. The rebels, fueled by anger and perhaps desire for revenge, stormed the church and massacred those inside.
That's horrific.
It is.
It sounds like the violence was escalating on both sides.
It was.
Yeah.
And this act of brutality at Sangara, while it might have energized some on the rebel side, it also alienated many potential supporters.
Really?
Many Creoles and mestizos who had initially sympathized with the rebels' cause were horrified by the massacre.
I can imagine.
They began to see the rebellion as a threat.
Right.
Not just to Spanish authority, but to their own safety and well-being.
It's a reminder that even in the midst of a struggle for freedom and justice, terrible things can happen.
Absolutely.
It makes you wonder how things might have turned out if the rebels had chosen a different path. One that didn't involve such brutality.
What impact do you think this act of violence had on the course of the rebellion?
I imagine it made it much harder for the rebels to gain wider support. It also likely gave the Spanish authorities more justification for their own brutal crackdown on the rebellion.
You're right. Yeah. The Spanish crown was already determined to crush the rebellion, and the massacre at Sangara gave them even more reason to use any means necessary to achieve that goal. Okay. And as the rebellion progressed, it became clear that Tupac Amaru II's vision of a unified indigenous uprising was facing some serious challenges.
What kind of challenges?
Well, emboldened by their victory at Sangara. Yeah. The rebels decided to try to capture Cusco. Cusco, as you might know,
was the former capital of the Inca Empire.
Right.
So it had a lot of symbolic importance.
It seems like capturing Cusco would have been a huge win for the rebels.
It would have been.
Both strategically and symbolically.
Yes.
Did they succeed?
They did not.
Oh.
In fact, their attempt to take Cusco turned out to be a major turning point in the rebellion.
Okay.
But not in the way they had hoped.
Oh, really?
They believed that the indigenous people in the city would rise up and join their cause.
Right.
But what they encountered was very different. Many indigenous nobles, those who had managed to find a place within the Spanish system, actually opposed the rebellion.
Wow.
They saw Tupac Amaru II as a threat to their own positions of power.
I see.
And actively worked against him.
So the rebels were facing resistance.
Yes.
Not just from the Spanish, but from within their own communities.
They were.
That must have been a bitter pill to swallow.
It was.
And it highlights a complex reality.
Yeah.
Even within oppressed groups, there can be divisions and differing perspectives.
Right.
It's not always a simple us versus them scenario.
So the hoped-for wave of support in Cusco never materialized.
No, it didn't.
What happened next?
Well, with their plans to capture Cusco thwarted, the rebels were gradually pushed back by the Spanish forces. And tragically, Tupac Amaru II was betrayed by two of his own supporters.
Oh, no.
And captured.
Betrayal is always a devastating blow.
It is.
Especially when you're leading a movement like this.
Yeah.
What happened to him after he was captured?
In 1781, Tupac Amaru II was subjected to a horrific public execution.
Oh, wow.
In Cusco's main square.
The Spanish authorities wanted to make an example of him.
They did.
What did they do?
They tried to tear him apart using horses.
Oh, my.
But when that failed, they beheaded him and then dismembered his body.
That's terrible.
His head and limbs were displayed in different cities as a warning to anyone else who might consider rebelling.
That's incredibly brutal.
It was.
It's hard to even imagine the level of cruelty involved.
It was horrific.
What about Michaela Bastidas?
Yeah.
What happened to her?
Sadly, she met a similar fate.
Oh, no.
She was captured along with Tupac Amaru II and executed a few weeks later.
Oh, wow.
She and a key ally, Samasa Kito Kandamaida, were both garroted.
Garroted?
Which is a method of strangulation.
Okay.
It was a public spectacle designed to humiliate and dehumanize them.
It's just heartbreaking to think about what they went through.
Yeah.
Their sons were executed too, right?
They were. Okay. Tupac Amaru II and Michaela Bastidas had 3 sons who were actively involved in the rebellion.
Okay.
They were all captured.
Oh, wow.
And executed alongside their parents.
Oh, that's awful.
Their youngest son, who was only 10 years old,
oh my gosh,
was forced to watch his parents' execution before being hanged himself.
That's absolutely horrific.
It was.
It's a stark reminder of the brutality of colonialism and the lengths to which the Spanish authorities were willing to go to maintain their power.
Absolutely. It's important to remember that this level of violence wasn't unique to the Tupac Amaru II rebellion.
Okay.
It was a common feature of colonial rule throughout the Americas.
Right.
The Spanish crown used terror and brutality to control the indigenous population and to discourage any form of resistance.
So with their leaders gone, what happened to the rebellion?
Right.
Did it just fizzle out?
Not at all.
Really?
It's almost as if Tupac Amaru II's death ignited a new, even more intense phase of the uprising.
So it became even stronger after the leader was gone.
It did.
That's surprising.
It is.
Who took up the mantle?
Well, it wasn't just one person.
Okay.
While Tupac Amaru II's sons met tragic ends.
Right.
He had a half-brother.
Okay.
Diego Cristobal Tupac Amaru.
Who decided to continue the fight.
Did he have the same level of support as his brother?
Initially, yes.
Why?
But the rebellion took a dark turn.
Oh.
It became incredibly violent, spreading throughout the high Peru region, which is modern-day Bolivia.
Right.
and even reaching into parts of Argentina.
Wow.
The rebels' tactics became much more brutal.
Oh?
They were no longer interested in capturing prisoners.
Oh.
They were out for blood.
Wow.
Anyone associated with the Spanish, even if they were indigenous, became a target.
It sounds like the rebellion lost a lot of the initial moral high ground it had.
Yes.
Fighting against oppression with more oppression.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that shift is reflected in the emergence of other rebel leaders.
Oh, okay.
There was Sebastian Pagador,
right,
a mestizo sergeant who led an uprising in Oruro, Bolivia.
Okay.
But perhaps the most radical figure to emerge was Juliana Pazza,
Okay.
also known as Tupac Amaru.
Tupac Amaru.
Yes.
That's got to be confusing.
Yeah.
But Juliana Pazza, a powerful Aymara leader, was a force to be reckoned with. She actually laid siege to La Paz, the administrative capital of the region, with her troops. And get this, her vision was even more radical than Tupac Amaru II's. She wanted to establish an Aymara Inca state.
Wow.
And completely purge all European influence.
Wow, that's quite a departure from where things started.
It is.
It seems like the goals of the rebellion were fracturing.
They were.
Yeah.
And this fracturing contributed to the overall chaos and bloodshed. The rebellion became a brutal, multi-sided conflict with atrocities committed on all sides.
Yeah.
It's estimated that around 100,000 people lost their lives during this period, making it the deadliest uprising in 18th century Spanish America.
It's a stark reminder of how revolutions can spiral out of control.
Absolutely.
How noble intentions can give way to horrific violence.
It really is. So what happened to Diego Cristóbal Túpac Amaru?
Right.
He seemed to have a more moderate approach.
He did.
Compared to these other leaders.
He became increasingly disillusioned.
Oh, really?
With the direction the rebellion was taking.
Okay.
Especially the racist undertones.
I see.
He saw the indiscriminate killing of anyone associated with European culture as a step too far.
Right.
Eventually, he decided to seek peace.
It sounds like he was trying to find a way to end the bloodshed.
He was.
And achieve some form of justice without resorting to the same kind of brutality that the Spanish were using.
Absolutely.
Do you think he was successful?
He had some success.
Oh.
He negotiated a peace agreement with the Spanish authorities, known as the Peace of Lampa. They granted him a pardon and even allowed him to retain some political power.
Wow.
Sadly, this peace wouldn't last.
Oh, no.
He was later accused of plotting another rebellion.
Really?
And was executed in 1783.
It seems like the Spanish authorities weren't very trusting.
No, they weren't.
But what about Tupac Amaru?
Yeah.
How did her story end?
Her story, unfortunately, ends in tragedy as well. Her vision of an Aymara Inca state, while inspiring to some, was ultimately too radical for many involved in the rebellion. She clashed with the Quechua, who formed a large part of the rebel forces. She also alienated some potential allies by rejecting any support from Creoles or indigenous nobles, who she saw as collaborators with the Spanish. Ultimately, she ended up with more enemies than friends.
Oh, wow.
She was betrayed, captured,
and
executed by the Spanish in 1781.
What a brutal end.
Yeah, it was.
To such a fiery and uncompromising figure.
Absolutely.
So much bloodshed.
Yes.
So much loss after all this upheaval.
Right.
What was the lasting impact of the Tupac Amaru II rebellion?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And one that historians continue to debate. On the surface, it might seem like a failure because they didn't achieve their immediate goal of overthrowing Spanish rule.
Right.
But think of it this way.
Okay.
The rebellion exposed the deep cracks in the colonial system.
I see.
The fact that so many people from different social classes and ethnic backgrounds were willing to risk their lives for change send a powerful message.
So even though the Spanish won the battles, the rebellion was a wake-up call.
Yes.
What kind of long-term impact did it have?
The rebellion had ripple effects that extended far beyond its immediate aftermath.
Oh, wow.
While the Spanish crown crushed the rebellion, it planted seeds of doubt and dissent.
Interesting.
People had seen that resistance was possible.
Yeah.
They had witnessed the courage of Tupac Amaru II, Michaela Bastidas, and so many others. And that memory, that inspiration would fuel future struggles for independence.
So the rebellion didn't directly lead to independence.
Right.
But it helped pave the way.
Exactly. The Tupac Amaru II rebellion was a turning point in the history of Latin America.
Okay.
It showed that Spanish rule was not invincible.
Wow.
And it inspired later generations of revolutionaries.
I see.
In fact, many leaders of the Latin American independence movements in the early 1800s cited Tupac Amaru II as a hero and an inspiration.
That's incredible.
It is.
It's amazing to think about how this one event, though brutally suppressed, could have such far-reaching consequences.
Absolutely.
It almost makes you wonder what might have happened if Tupac Amaru II had lived to see those independence movements.
It's fascinating to consider, isn't it?
It is.
But the rebellion's impact wasn't just limited to the political sphere.
Oh, really?
It also had profound cultural and social implications.
Well,
think about this.
Yeah.
How do we remember historical figures? What makes someone a hero or a villain?
I guess it depends on who's telling the story and what message they're trying to convey.
You're exactly right.
Yeah.
And in the case of Tupac Amaru II, his story became a powerful symbol of indigenous resistance against colonial oppression, even though the rebellion itself was marked by violence and ultimately failed to achieve its immediate goals. The image of Tupac Amaru II fighting for justice resonated with people throughout Latin America and beyond.
So he became a symbol of hope.
Yeah.
A reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, it's important to fight for what you believe in.
He did. And that symbolism continues to inspire people today.
Really?
His image appears in murals and artwork.
Wow.
His name is invoked by activists and social movements.
That's powerful.
He became a powerful reminder of the ongoing struggle against injustice and inequality.
Yeah.
He's a symbol of indigenous pride.
Right.
A challenge to colonial narratives, and an inspiration to those who fight for a more just world.
So what's the takeaway for us today, listening to this story centuries later?
Right.
What can we learn from the Tupac Amaru II rebellion?
It reminds us that history is not just a collection of dates and names.
Okay.
It's about the choices people make, the struggles they face, and the legacies they leave behind. The Tupac Amaru II rebellion is a complex and multifaceted event.
Yeah.
It's a story of courage and brutality, of hope and despair, and it's a story that continues to resonate with us today as we grapple with issues of social justice, inequality, and the legacy of colonialism.
It makes you think, doesn't it?
It does.
About how the past is never truly past.
Yeah.
How it shapes our present and continues to influence our future.
Absolutely.
This has been an incredible deep dive, I have to say.
It has.
So many layers to uncover and consider.
Yeah.
It really makes you think about how history is written and who gets to tell this story.
Right.
I think what stayed with me is that even in the face of defeat, a struggle for justice can inspire generations to come.
Well said.
Yeah.
And it leaves us with a lot to think about, doesn't it?
It certainly does. So to our listeners, we'll leave you with this.
Okay.
How do you think we can learn from the complexities of history, with all its triumphs and tragedies, to build a better future?
Absolutely.
Something to ponder as you go about your day.
Yeah.
Until next time, keep exploring and keep asking questions.